Some places in Washington, D.C. feel loud with history. The National Mall is one of them. But the Tidal Basin? The Tidal Basin whispers. Even before we reached the memorials surrounding the water, the atmosphere felt different somehow. Slower, quieter, less like standing inside history, and more like standing beside memory itself. The city softened here. The noise faded just enough for reflection to creep in. And without even realizing it at first, my son changed with it. Earlier in the day, while walking among the war memorials near the National Mall, he'd carried himself with this quiet, patriotic pride that honestly caught me off guard. He stood taller beside the statues, saluted soldiers without being asked, paused respectfully at walls of names. But around the Tidal Basin, something shifted. The memorials here weren't centered on battlefields. They were centered on endurance, leadership, human struggle, perseverance, hope. And suddenly my son became quieter too. At the Franklin Delano Roosevelt Memorial, he stopped pretending to stand among soldiers and instead stood listening beside the old radio broadcasts and breadline sculptures as though he were trying to understand another generation entirely. Not performatively, not because someone told him to. He was simply absorbing it. Watching my then 10-year-old son move through those spaces so differently, depending on the memorial, left a deeper impact on me than I expected. Children don't fake reverence very well. They either feel something or they don't. And standing there beside the water, surrounded by stone, cherry trees, and echoes of another era, I remember having this overwhelming realization settle quietly over me. This is exactly where we are supposed to be right now. Not rushing through another ordinary day. Not distracted by work, schedules, or noise. Here, walking through memory together. That feeling stayed with me throughout the entire basin. Because the strange thing about the Tidal Basin is that most visitors see beauty first. The water, the cherry blossoms, the reflections, Jefferson's white marble glowing across the shoreline. But beneath all of that beauty is a landscape born from problems. Long before this became one of Washington, D.C.'s most peaceful spaces, this area was marshland, known as the Potomac Flats. Muddy, flood-prone, unhealthy, and infamous for foul-smelling, stagnant water. The Washington City Canal nearby had deteriorated into what was essentially an open sewer. Summers in the capital were miserable. Flooding worsened constantly. Disease spread easily through poor sanitation. So the city did something extraordinary. It rebuilt the landscape itself. Engineers dredged enormous amounts of sediment from the Potomac River, reshaping the shoreline and creating entirely new land. Stone seawalls were constructed, parks were planned, and eventually the Tidal Basin became both an engineering solution and a place of reflection, which means one of America's most peaceful memorial landscapes originally existed because the city desperately needed fixing. And honestly, that somehow makes it feel even more human to me. Because the Tidal Basin has never really been about perfection. It has always been about rebuilding. Even when we visited, you could still feel that balance between beauty and fragility. The cherry trees weren't blooming yet. We were there out of season. and somehow that almost made the place feel more honest. No postcard version, no perfect timing, just bare branches stretching quietly over the water while people wandered beneath them anyway. Even the cherry trees themselves carry their own layered history. Gifted by Japan in 1912 as a symbol of friendship, they eventually became one of the most beloved parts of Washington, D.C. And when construction plans for the Jefferson Memorial later threatened many of those trees, people protested fiercely to protect them. Because people don't fight that hard for places that mean nothing to them. Over time, the Tidal Basin became more than engineered shoreline. It became sacred space. The Jefferson Memorial reflected ideals of liberty and contradiction. The FDR Memorial telling stories of depression, war, sacrifice, and perseverance. The Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial standing as both challenge and hope. Each memorial adding another layer to the emotional landscape surrounding the water. Not just monuments to people, but monuments to ideas. And maybe that's why this place lingered with me so long afterward. Because the Tidal Basin doesn't ask you to simply remember history. It asks you to sit with it for a while, to reflect on it, to wrestle with it, to feel it. Today, the basin itself is changing again. The seawalls are sinking. Rising tides threaten both the pathways and the famous cherry trees. Massive restoration projects are underway to preserve the area for future generations, which somehow feels poetic. Because the Tidal Basin has always been rebuilding itself. From marshland to engineered shoreline to memorial landscape to preservation project. Always evolving, always adapting, always trying to hold memory together a little longer against time. And maybe that's the real lesson hidden beside the water. Not perfection, not performance, but the deeply human instinct to preserve what matters before it slips away. Thank you for walking the Tidal Basin with us. And if there's a place that changed the way you saw history or changed the way your children experienced it, I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. Until next time, keep wandering, keep wondering, and keep making travel personal.